Everybody, this is Dream, and we have a three-game slate here for DraftKings and FanDuel today. Very small. Tons of injuries with the teams that are playing, so that's always fun. Before I get in the injury report, I do think the pricing on DraftKings is a lot better than on FanDuel today. Seems like everybody's a little bit overpriced on FanDuel for the most part. So that's going to make a difference on how we play as well. So let's go ahead and get into the injury report, though. For the Clippers, we have Powell out, Leonard is doubtful, Morris is probable, Wall is probable, and Kennard is probable. For the Heat, we have Butler questionable, Hero, Struss, and Oladipo are probable. Dedmon is questionable, and then Highsmith is probable. For the Rockets, we have Fernando questionable, Tate out, and Porter Jr. questionable. For the Spurs, we have Podol out, Sokran out, Bates-Diop out, Richardson probable, and McDermott probable. For the Nuggets, we have Pope is probable, and Porter Jr. is out. And for the Blazers, we have Hart probable, and Eubanks probable. So we got a lot of injuries today, a lot of information that we're going to have to wait and see closer to lock. But overall, we do have a slate, and it's 3 games, and so we're going to have to make the best of that as we can. So let's go and get into the players I do like today. We're going to start with Trey Jones here for the Spurs. His price here on FanDuel is about where I would max out wanting to utilize him, but on a small slate like this, he's a viable option because he plays, 30 plus minutes, and he typically hits around 30 fantasy points or better. He has had some off games lately, but he's still pretty good, and so I think he's a pretty good play on the slate. Not obviously a super lock, but he's just a decent play. Same goes with Jalen Green. His price point is not super ideal today, but especially with the potential of injuries and he has some nice upside. He definitely has some play today, though he is pretty scoring dependent on whether he 5x's or not in a slate. His price has come down a little bit from what it was recently, and he's been pretty good most of the season, and so I do think he's viable on the slate. Then we're going to look at Jamal Murray here for the Nuggets. Now, his price point has popped up some as he's gotten more and more minutes lately, but he's been playing a lot, and he's been doing pretty well, and so he's been relatively consistent. And he does have some pop in him where he can get 50 fantasy point games. The last game against Dallas was a little bit rougher, but I mean, Dallas is a good defensive team, especially against point guard. I look for this game against Portland to be much more fast-paced and scoring friendly for him. And then Tyler Hero for the Heat. His price point continues to rise, but he's been playing extremely well since he's come back from his last injury. I expect him to continue playing like that until further notice. And even though this is a toughish matchup against the Clippers, he's been playing extremely well. I don't think the Clippers, especially if they have guys sit out, are going to really be able to do much to stop him. Then we'll look at Keldon Johnson here for the Spurs. His price point has risen a little bit, but he's been pretty solid lately. I do think he'll have some good opportunity in this game with the guys still out for the Spurs. I expect him to play full complement of minutes and have plenty of shot opportunities in this game. If he can start shooting the ball a little bit better, that's definitely going to help his output as well. Eric Gordon for the Rockets is kind of a wild card today. His minutes have been all over the place lately, but if he ends up playing, which he should because he's been off for a few days, he should have some full complement of minutes and get plenty of shot opportunities in this game. Then we'll look at Jabari Smith for the Houston as well. He's been playing pretty decent, and his minutes have popped up lately. Though he is a little bit streaky, his price is pretty fair for what, considering the fact that he typically has some upside at this price point. So I think he's in a good spot here. Then we'll look at Aaron Gordon. Aaron Gordon is an interesting spot here for Denver, simply because of Porter Jr. being out. He tends to get a little bit more minutes and shot opportunities as a result. And he also, he's been rebounding decently well lately. He does need to get more per field stats, honestly, to be much more exciting as a player. But overall, because he does have some potential to only 10 fantasy point games sometimes, which can be super annoying when trying to roster him. But he does have good upside, and as you saw in the last game where he had 27 points and 8 rebounds, that's the kind of game that we look for him to have when we do roster him, and today is a type of situation where he's going to be viable. Then we'll look at Alperen Sengun for Houston. Now, he's not super ideal, but he has a nice matchup against the Spurs, who doesn't have anybody to stop him, and even though the Rockets look like they have a lot of their centers back and stuff, he should still get plenty of minutes, and if he can get a double-double, he'll definitely pay off here. Then we'll look at Joseph Nurkic. Now, he's been playing extremely well with Lillard out, and it does look like Lillard's going to be back this game, but still, he's been playing extremely well. His price is actually a little bit cheaper than what I expected to be on the slate. He is a pretty good player, and so I expect him to play well in this game, even though it is a tough matchup against Jokic, who is the last guy I'm going to mention for DraftKings. Jokic has been playing extremely well in some games, and obviously his price is super expensive, but if you just need a full-fledged amount of fantasy points, then he's a good way to get them, especially in a small slate like this. He's an interesting play on this one, especially against the matchup and stuff like that. So overall, I think he's a viable play on the slate. So that's what I have for DraftKings. Let's go and get over to FanDuel. We're going to start with Trey Jones again for the Spurs. His price point is not quite as good here on DraftKings or FanDuel as DraftKings, but he's still viable, and he's been playing pretty solid lately, and I expect him to have a pretty solid game here, especially with lots of injuries and a fast-paced game. Jalen Green, kind of in the same boat. Not as cheap as he is on FanDuel or DraftKings, but he has some upside in this matchup, and I do think he's got some viability on the slate. Then we look at Jamal Murray, who just looks like he's in a pretty good spot here for Denver. He's been playing pretty good since he's been back from his injuries, playing full complement of minutes. And so I think he's in a decent spot. I don't love him today, but I do like him okay, even though his price point is not super ideal. The same goes for Tyler Hero. His price point has popped up quite a bit here on FanDuel, but he does have 50 fantasy point upside, and he's been over 40 fantasy points the last 5 games. So I expect that to continue here against the Clippers, who don't really have anybody who can stop them, especially with most of their good defensive players out. Keldon Johnson is another guy I like here, even though his price point is higher than I'd like it to be. Everybody's price point here on FanDuel is higher than I'd like it to be, so he's been playing really well, though, and he has 50 fantasy point upside, and he's a decent option on a slate where there's not a ton of decent options. Marcus Morris looks kind of decent here on FanDuel as well. He should potentially be back today, even though he set out the last game. Looks like he should be back, and if that's the case, then he should be viable on the slate, especially with a bunch of guys sitting out. But we're just going to have to make sure that he ends up playing. Aaron Gordon looks kind of interesting for Denver against Portland, even though his price point is high here. He does have 50 fantasy point upside, which gives him viability here, but he is scoring dependent lately, and so you have to keep that in mind. Then we'll look at Nikola Jokic for Denver. His price point is pretty high, but he's been dominating, and he does get a lot of peripheral stats, especially has triple-double potential. Obviously, he needs to score, 25, 30 points, regular points, just to make sure that he has a good opportunity to 5x as well. But he's definitely going to have the opportunity in this game against Portland, who doesn't have a ton of guys that can really slow him down. And then Jusuf Nurkic, who is his opponent in the game. He looks pretty viable lately. He's been playing extremely well. This is a tough matchup for him against Jokic, but I do think he's viable. Now, with Lillard potentially being back, that would definitely hurt him some, so do keep that in mind. But overall, he looks viable on the slate. But I would definitely go with Jokic on FanDuel over Nurkic. So, with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, and subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. And have a nice day, guys.